Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights City Council Public Safety and Health Committee April 22nd meeting. It's 5 o'clock. I'd like to call roll. Do we have Vice Chair Gail Larson?
She's here.
Do we have Member Craig Cobb?
Present.
Do we have Guest Member President Tony Kuda here?
I am here.
And we have Eddie Ballister, our clerk, and we have a special guest via Zoom, Ryan Murray from the ETC Institute. I'm going to jump right into our agenda, which is the ETC Institute. Before we listen to Ryan and talk to him about a proposal that he shared with me, I'd just like to recap for everybody. During our last 3 or 4 meetings, we've talked about a resident satisfaction survey, specific and similar to the ones that the City of Cleveland Heights have done in prior years. The last one was in 2020. We got keyed into this with some work that we saw our neighboring city, Shaker Heights, do, and how they measured the residents' interests when it comes to public safety. And there were some very interesting results that we thought that we would need for our work here in Cleveland Heights. I reached out to ETC because they've done the last several surveys we have. I believe 2020, 2018, I believe there's either 2014 and a 2016. There were some conversations that we've had about repeating these, or the value of repeating these on a regular basis, just so you can just do some measurements and just sort of see how the city has performed year after year. Like, for example, in the area of public safety. I mean, what are the key issues and what are those issues that are important to our citizens? So we've dug up the survey, we've looked at it. We do have a quote from Ryan to redo this exact same survey with modifications. And I think we can talk a little bit about that. But what I thought it was important, my homework assignment was to reach out to Ryan. I've had 2 conversations with Ryan and get a proposal that we have in hand at this time. So Ryan, if you don't mind, if you have a few minutes, can you kind of go over what your company does, what you've done in the past, maybe some key things that you think would be important for our discussion?
Yeah. So as was mentioned, I provided a brief scope of work and proposal. What that really does is just kind of go through the major task types that we're going to accomplish. It's really repetitive of the prior survey work. And the reason for that is that we really want to treat this thing as if it's a kind of a new iteration of a previously established process. While our methodology does change over time just to meet current needs and differences from 2020 to 2025, for the most part, everything that we're going to do is very much similar. Am I sharing my presentation?
You're sharing.
Yep, you've got the presentation going up.
Okay, good deal. It's showing share over there. Sorry, I was just confused. But just a little bit about our firm. If you weren't around the last time that we conducted a survey for you all, we're really known as the nation's leader in market research for local government organizations. And just in your area alone, recently I did Shaker Heights. That was just a couple of years ago. I've also worked with Cleveland Metro Parks. We've done work with Columbus. And generally, where our kind of wheelhouse is, where we focus most on, what the most of my work takes place directly with municipalities. Now, within that, there's sometimes going to be a park district or two, as you see on here, Hamilton County. We also did Washington Township and a couple of others here as well. But these are all park surveys or community surveys that we've conducted within the last 5 years or so. And it was already mentioned, we've done at least 3. I had trouble tracking down the 16 files from home, but I think we've done 4 full surveys for you all. What we would probably do if we engage with one another to conduct the survey is have a discussion about which trend lines are most important. But we'd likely at least want to take a look at that to 2020, kind of getting that pre and post-COVID look for sure. But we could even look back as far as 2014 if there's maybe a strategic purpose for looking 10 years back. Or even if we do this towards the end of this year, or maybe, I like to hold my proposals for at least a year to honor those prices. Even if you look at 2026, we could do some 10-year trends as well with that particular survey. In terms of our approach, what I hope you understand by the end of our conversation is that I'm very flexible. We're flexible as a group, but we do like to task things up. Really, it's the best way to respond to proposals, but it's also really a good way to kind of just break these projects up. And the first thing that we're going to do is work together to look at that 2020 survey and community letter and really just take a look about what's the most pertinent, what's the most needed items. I know you guys are in a community here related to public safety, so do we want to look at maybe our city and county of Durham police survey that we do every other year? Or is there another community locally that you'd like to see results like Shaker? Or we do Cincinnati survey every year. We can look at their surveys and see if there's anything public service related that we could leverage our results or questions on as well. As was mentioned, we would want to take a look at 2020 to ensure that we're focusing on those most important questions, but that's where we'll also begin to take a look at trends. So we want to know what is most important for us to track over time. How does this 2020 survey compare to 18 or 16 or 14? And what are some of those areas or lines that we want to make sure are included? And one of the big changes from when we engaged with you last time in 2025 is that we're going to make this available online in additional languages. We're also going to include different languages on our cover letter. And I know Cleveland Heights is a fairly diverse community. We know that not everybody in the community is speaking a different language, nor would they take us up on it. But it's a really good kind of olive branch that we can offer really at a cost-effective rate on our side, so we're not passing the cost along to you. And what that does is just continue to minimize any kind of response bias. So say you are English as a second language speaker, a survey comes all in English, there's some words that you're just not 100% sure on, you might feel rather left out. But if your first language is Spanish and at the bottom it says, hey, go to this online website or give us a call at this toll-free number to ask any questions that you might have, and it says that in Spanish, it really legitimizes that contact attempt, gives us the best opportunity of really creating the most diverse and representatively demographically pertinent sample that we can. And so we'll be looking at the Census Bureau statistics, and there's too many to really put on a page here, but in addition to some of those language factors, we'll be looking at race, ethnicity factors, age groups, we'll be looking at home versus rent status, and we'll also be doing kind of a geographic analysis of your community. And as you can see out there to the right, those are the 2020 survey respondent locations. Those are approximate locations scattered on the map there. But as you can see, we did a really good job of kind of distributing the survey and then collecting 452 surveys back that were equally or pretty well distributed across the city. It's important to note that when we're looking at demographics, when we're focusing in on languages, the most affluent community members, regardless of what they look like or what languages they speak, are the most likely to respond quickly. What we at ETC Institute need to think about is where are those responses geographically concentrated? How do we expand our sampling group outside of that geographic concentration? And then also, are the demographics distributed well as well? And so we're looking at all these different factors. We're comparing it to Census Bureau statistics. We're going to try to do our best job to reach a goal for the total number of completed surveys. But we won't finish completion or finish administration of the survey until reaching that demographic composition. And the reason for that is to ensure that when we're saying, hey, listen up, council, your results have increased or decreased X% in this area from 2020 to 2025, I want to be able to say, hey, I have a good demographic sample that reasonably matches the last one. The methodology is reasonably the same. And I'm comparing apples to apples with you. What I don't want to have happen is somebody say, well, hey, Ryan, it's really noteworthy that you pointed out that there's been a decrease in overall satisfaction, but in 2020, your sample was very well balanced and representative of our community. And in 2025, all of your responses are just in the northern part of our community. And that would just be kind of egg on my face and things that ETC Institute's always trying to avoid. But really, at the end of the day, we're not finished with survey administration until we've reached that demographic composition that we're hoping for. Geographic distribution will come along with that. And while there would potentially be some waiting if we just cannot achieve those goals, I have not worked on a project where we've been forced to wait the results to get to our demographic composition that's needed versus just continuing to administer until reaching that goal. In terms of administration, the way that we do this is multimodal. So similar to the language stuff, I want to make sure I'm breaking down all response barriers the moment that the survey is released. And so what we're going to do is together work to finalize that survey instrument. Hopefully we can offer an incentive. We request that each one of our clients allows agencies to offer that incentive to respondents. We'll mail out those survey packets with those additional language options on there. And we'll ask respondents to either complete that mailed survey with a postage paid return reply envelope that'll send it back to us, or they can go online, or they can give us a call. We know that just mailing the surveys and saying, hey, give me a call, go online, or complete this paper survey is probably not going to do it. So we're going to do additional follow-up activities on social media, using social media ads to target our random sample. We'll send emails and text messages to folks, and if needed, we'll begin phone calling towards the end of a project just to make sure that that demographic composition is made. In terms of mail, respondents are likely to receive that first initial survey packet, then they might receive a follow-up postcard. We do try to refrain from sending second mailings of the full survey packets just because it's a cost-intensive process. And by the time those surveys arrive, we've usually hit some of those households we're mailing to, so we're just trying to avoid situations like that. Once we fully complete administration, and we'll get into survey analysis and reporting. We'll create a report that includes a generalized executive summary with methodology, but most importantly, we're going to be focusing on these trends. And usually what you're seeing here is that 16-year potentially dropped out of the report. We're moving everything from one server to another, so I think I'm just missing some stuff. But frequently when we make trend charts, we'll include 3. It'll be kind of the most recent one, which would have been 2018, and then the first survey, which would have been 14. But I do believe that we've got 16 results somewhere as well. Now, trend lines are only so helpful as we can kind of pinpoint what has maybe happened. Well, from 2014 to 2020, there was a lot of congruency in our communities. 2020 really began to shake things up, and that's when we saw kind of a massive shift nationally and an overall satisfaction. So we'd have a discussion with you all about what we are interested in trending, what we might have context for, what we might not have context for internally, but also what those long-term trend lines are looking like and what's most important for us there. In terms of overall satisfaction and overall analysis types, we're going to be offering some GIS mapping similar to prior years. What I like is that we offer these maps, but we do offer a dashboard, and we can have that discussion. It's something I'm always kind of, once we engage, I like to tell clients about it a little bit more, walk you through it. I think on its face surface, it can be like a really popular, good idea, but it really does depend on whether or not communities are going to use it. And sometimes in lieu of a full spin for a full dashboard, I'll just get you the mapping features built online anyways. And so what we can do is between 2020 and 2025, we'll shade these same areas, and we'll be able to change the shading based on the year. So if one area goes from very satisfied to dissatisfied, it'll shift from that blue to orange, or maybe a blue to yellow, or maybe even blues to dark blues in some of those instances as well. But what we really like to do is leverage that geographic item that we're collecting with each survey, geospatially mapping that this way to kind of give really city staff more than anything kind of a little bit of an insight as to what might be going on locally. Understanding this should all be taken with a grain of salt when we get into mapping just based on our sample sizes. We can see that based on that dot map we saw earlier. Just some of these zones, since as block groups are just not overly populated with responses, that can kind of tend to maybe push us down a rabbit hole that doesn't exist.
Hey, Ryan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So going back a slide, those actually forward one slide.
Okay.
So the map. So those geographies, I want to make this as non-political as possible because members of our administration have but state that they're concerned that such a survey is going to be political. And normally, when we've looked at stuff in my prior gigs on school boards, you do look at things by ward, or you look at things by elementary school. How do you just use it? Can we draw these lines any way that we want to draw them so they don't look political? And I'll tell you a couple reasons why. I mean, we have a north part in our city, the Noble neighborhood. There's a conventional wisdom. People feel they're underserved. I'm just repeating what I've heard. I wouldn't say that's accurate, correct or incorrect. But I mean, I think that there's areas in our community that we want to see, how these things do lay out from a geographical perspective.
And so what we were seeing on the map here, and your boundaries have likely changed since 2020, but they very well could have not as well, depending on when we did the survey, when we got your updated files. But these are called census block groups, which are some of the smallest geographic sampling areas that the U.S. Census will use to really kind of look at populations. So while each community is different, and I understand as an elected official that oftentimes perceptions are reality in your seats. If this is the political boundary map for you all, we will refrain from using this, but this should be fairly atypical in the sense that it is Census Bureau statistic related and has nothing to do with like population density or anything city related. So the city would have no say on these boundaries as their census block groups that we've merged as needed. But again, we would look to the city, and if you say, that highway that kind of diagonally cuts there, if you're like, hey, that's our north-south boundary, I need everything north and south of that, maybe we don't need to create the visual maps to call super attention to that, but we can create cross tabulations where you see the data maybe even like this, where it's, Cleveland Heights North versus Cleveland Heights South versus Cleveland Heights versus the US in this instance. So there's a lot of options for us in geographic mapping. Political zones are the most helpful because they're population based. So if you have 4 council districts, it'd be really great for me to be able to do this by council district, but we understand the political aspects. So our first recommendation will be census block group. Second recommendation will be something maybe unique that we would just design together.
So I didn't think about the census block group. I mean, I think that makes things a whole lot easier for us because it takes one political perspective out of the equation. Instead of looking at wards.
I always forget what the exact.
We don't have wards, so it's not.
Yeah, we don't.
Well,
Voting like.
we don't vote in wards. We
Our
have,
precinct?
the city's divided into wards, but it's not. We don't have ward representation.
Oh, okay.
Learned something today.
Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
So basically, and I always want to make sure that I'm not misconstruing what a block group is, but it's a subdivision. It's really just a census tract. It's the smallest geographic unit for which the Census Bureau publishes data. So that gives us the ability to, like you said, eat through or eat away at any political bias that you might try to assume is in the map, and just say, hey, your council districts and everything else should float over these lines.
Okay.
Pretty much. So.
Fair enough.
But similar to that, if we wanted to do something like that, but we want to look at it geographically, but maybe we don't, because sometimes the visuals are really powerful. Maybe we don't want the visuals in everybody's face. Like I said, we could easily split the data in the back end and create tables or create charts like this. But in another analysis feature beyond the mapping, beyond the trend lines, is that we'll do some benchmarking for you. The one thing that I wanted to do as well, and I just cannot get that report to open for me, but what we would probably want to look at too is maybe an Ohio-specific average as well as a U.S. average, or because Cleveland Heights and some of the Heights communities around the area are just a little bit unique. What I've done for other communities is kind of just taken a look at all of our clients over the last few years. We've kind of created a bespoke average. Something that's unique to the community. It's based on multiple or just singular factors. I was in North Shore, Chicago area. The median household income was over $550,000, and they were like, "Well, hey, give us an average of all your clients that have over $250,000 median household income." So we had maybe about 12 communities that we could fit into the average, and so Lake Bluff, Illinois, got a very specific, unique performance range average that compared their results specifically to about 12 of our other clients who have similar population types. So what we would look to do is, again, have a conversation with staff and yourselves to determine, is the U.S. average all we're looking for, which you should perform well above in many areas, but as you see here, our TV channel, our usefulness for our webpage might be competitive or right along the national averages. Or do we want maybe a more robust average that maybe we're below or in line with more than we are above? That gives, our city staff, our administrative staff, that ability to kind of look at others and see what they're doing as well. So again, flexibility is key here. We wouldn't assume that during one of these calls any decisions would be made, but we want to let you all know those decisions later on can be made and will be made. There'll be a discussion had with staff and things like that. One of the last features that I would assume would make its way into our report, and I'm actually going to, for this example, sorry, I've got this Zoom screen floating on my other screen here. I'm actually going to pull up our specific IS charts, and this is actually from Cleveland Heights 2020, but here we go. And so this is a analysis we call important satisfaction. It's very aptly named because we've asked respondents to rate their overall satisfaction with an item. And then in a forced follow-up question, they're asked to rank which items should receive the most emphasis or most important to them, should be most important to city leaders over the next few years. The idea is to really force rate what's most important to us or what needs the most assistance. And in 2020, based on the analysis, we had about 3 high priority items. We've kind of changed this from high priority to kind of tier levels, just to kind of not put a name on it like that. But basically what we would do is push a survey design method that would allow us to leverage this type of analysis, and maybe not as helpful with utility services, but definitely with the overall categories or development or redevelopment. This will probably have changed quite a bit over the last few years. We also did public safety, so I know that this will be an important one for you all, especially looking at overall satisfaction. It's really high, and really an importance rate that's really high, which tells me as the consultant you're performing very well. Residents want you to continue to emphasize that performance to prevent crime, make police visible in neighborhoods. But we would also do this for code enforcement, maintenance services, and anything else that we might have enough questions to ask to really give us that opportunity to force rank. In terms of some of that additional benchmarking, we actually did this for you last time. We did this for communities with a population of less than 50,000. Well, I think population factors are nice. I do prefer to look at incomes or maybe even rent versus own propensities versus that. I think it gives us a better opportunity to really feel out where folks are. But 50,000 is kind of a unique range where municipalities are kind of stuck in the middle. They're not a really big giant city like Cleveland or like Cincinnati where they've got a lot of resources, and they're not quite small. They're not at my size where I'm about 7,000 people, so I don't have a lot of resources or a lot of abilities. And so you find yourself kind of looking through these different lenses, and what we want to do is be that partner to help your staff, to help you all consult, figure out what is going to be the best option for you all over the next couple of years as you leverage and use this survey data. With that, I know I've gone forever. That was my last slide. So I'll take any questions, try to take any notes on my side, get you all back anything else. I know that it's really important to trend stuff from past results, but I think that we can really leverage our survey and specifically some of our analysis types. That important satisfaction analysis is great. Using 5-point scales gives us the ability to accurately map things. And then we'll focus on benchmarking too during survey design. Is that important, or is it more important that we ask it a little bit differently because we know Cleveland Heights is maybe just a little bit more unique than our benchmarking would let on? So with that, I'm taking questions.
Yeah, do you guys have any questions?
No, you're on the committee.
All right.
Oh, so am I.
So are you.
Go ahead. You're the vice chair.
Thanks, Greg. I am so impressed with the location of survey respondents that you got in 2020. If we can get that again, we'd be really rocking it because there's such spread out throughout the north and south parts of our city. I do like the idea of using census tracts, Chairman Posh, for the boundaries.
I do too.
And that's not political. So I do have a question for you, Ryan. How do you get the addresses that you send the surveys to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. We use a list brokerage firm that should have a list of all residential addresses within your city's boundaries. What we'll ask for from city staff is basically a boundary shapefile that shows us what those outside boundaries are. I tell my list brokerage firm that, hey, these 12 zip codes touch these boundaries. I need every single address within each one zip code. And then I basically map all those zip codes as dots on the map. And I tell my software anything outside of your city limits, exclude. Anything inside is now my sample. And And then at random, I'll basically assign each record a number like 1 to 20,000, and then I'll randomly select those from across the population. And that should, theoretically, random sampling should return the proportionate value of Black, African American, white, Hispanic responses. It doesn't, just based on the way that we act as humans. So that's where the follow-ups come in. So that's when I have to kind of start poking on everybody's shoulders.
Your follow-up strategy is excellent, and I'm sure that's why you got such a great response as well. I did have one more question of the committee. Would we want to have Spanish surveys in case we needed them? We need.
Well, I think, Ryan, if we went with additional languages, does that adjust the price?
If it's Spanish, no. If we need to print and mail in Spanish, yes. So our methodology will really call for the inclusion of at least Spanish, if not a second language on top of that, to make it English, Spanish, and a third language. We can do that online. We'll put those language lines on the cover letter, we'll put those phone numbers on the cover letter, and we'll translate the online version. It's just the return on the investment on Spanish surveys does not exist. And I'm not talking about communities like Cleveland Heights now, I'm talking Miami-Dade County, San Antonio, El Paso County, where we mail Spanish surveys and just don't get any return via mail, even though we do get them online. And so our recommendation is allow ETC Institute, translate the survey in Spanish at a minimum, get it online in Spanish. If there are additional languages, we'll have that conversation.
Sure.
If we need a printed paper copy, I can send you the Word file. You all can print those off if needed and kind of distribute them to folks who ask. But typically, if you're a Spanish speaker and you get that mailed stuff and you really want that Spanish copy, you're going to call me first and you're going to say, hey, Ryan, can you send me a paper copy? I'll send them a paper copy.
Thank you.
Ryan, your surveys that you did for the city, if you go to our website, they're online.
Okay, great. They're probably just on my J server,
Yeah.
not on my Z server that we're switching out, but thank you so much.
Yeah, to me it was, and I forgot this, that we had them done every 2 years from 2014 to 2020, and then we stopped.
Yeah.
So we're 4 years overdue for having this survey done.
Was that about the time Tanisha left?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was about the time Travis started winning Super Bowls here in Kansas City, too.
Now.
That's right, don't mess with
Rub
us.
it in.
He's ours now, for now. We can have him back when he retires. So.
Okay.
He's a crazy boy when he went to our high school, obviously, and his brother Jason, and they've been so incredibly generous, not only to your community, but to our community. So we are thankful. My prior gig on the school board, if you needed help and you reached out to them, they would be there in a heartbeat.
That's awesome.
It
When I
is.
worked with Shaker, I got a lot of the same sentiments. I mean, it wasn't Travis and Jason Kelsey, but a lot of the same community-based sentiments that people come back, people help. It's interesting. That's why when I said that, I wasn't lying. Those Heights communities, you all are just a little bit of a different beast. In your average North Shore or Chicago area, it's just a little bit unique, a little bit different over there. So it's always nice though. It's a nice change, I guess, from some of our other community areas.
So I have a couple other questions here. Just following through a little bit more of the depoliticizing such a survey. We did go through a change of government. We're now a mayoral form of government versus a city manager form of government. And there's the new mayor has been in the seat for 3 years, in his fourth year now. There's an election coming in November. There is concern that there's been concern that he has brought to our attention that any such survey can be political and will be used for political purposes. And I can't, I just want the data. I don't want anything to be used for political purposes. And, we understand that when you go through a wholesale change, you may see some dip when it comes to satisfaction as you churn through. employees, directors, and you make this city your own, as opposed to a city manager versus a mayor. So what can we do to make sure that this thing isn't political, but we're getting the data that we need, so we as a legislative body can help prioritize and make funding decisions on things. I mean, for example, if we see that there's more of a need for public safety, we help set the budget for public safety. We can make sure that more money goes into public safety than maybe something else.
Yep.
And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really the intent of the results. Is to focus in on service-related priorities, trying our best to alleviate some of the, and this was very unique because we didn't have a lot of questions like this before COVID. So what we tried to focus on in our bread and butter are kind of these overall major categories of services provided by the city. We can do this. Unfortunately, with our political climate nationally, I don't think there's really very many rules anymore. So I don't see why a potential competitor to the mayoral race wouldn't potentially see quality of, I'm just trying to say quality of police services down 4%. Now just imagine 2020's 2025 and 2018's 2020. It's down almost 6 percentage points. It exceeds our margin of error. I'd say as a political opponent, you could easily grasp onto that type of information and then cherry pick it and use it however you'd like. And I don't think there's anything that we can do in survey design or administration or in the reporting that would alleviate that other than basically just providing you with just frequency tables of what the 2025 results said and hoping that people don't go out and do all their own homework. To completely try to depoliticize it, I think would not be something that we could do. The best thing that you could do is maybe just do it right after the election. But again, I'm just not sure what the data needs are of folks. Here's another good example. Hey, this many people have contacted the city. I'm not really concerned about which departments they contacted, but what if the results went way down here? Now, is that really like the mayor's issue? Did the mayor really have a hand in it becoming not easy to contact the person they needed to reach? Probably not. But if you're an opponent who's not willing to take the high road, you could easily make that case. And then you've got data here to suggest that it's maybe correct or accurate. So I do worry a little bit if there is this massive concern about that, because what you're likely to experience based on my experience is a downturn in overall satisfaction across the board almost for key city services. That includes everything from perceptions, quality of life, place to raise children, value for taxes received, to police services, visibility of police in neighborhoods, overall quality of police services. Those are things that I say because I've seen communities in Texas with high 90 rates of satisfaction for police services for decades dip into the 60s, dip into the 70s over the last couple of years. There's been something that's taken place really over the last 2.5 years, 18 months, somewhere in that range, that has completely tanked overall perception-related satisfaction in some of our more conservative communities. We think that it's maybe a little bit of a national discourse on the negativity surrounding governments and our local governments and their inability or ineffectiveness as entities. I think that's probably a big piece of it, but I think nationally we're also just seeing things that tell us, we're not getting as much value. So then you start to talk about the funding issue. So is inflation rising? Are job rates going all right? Are the job numbers good? Those things can also impact our perceptions, which push down the results sometimes. So I would push some caution because there are also other questions here that we probably want to be cautious of, and I'm going to share my screen again. But these are development and redevelopment activities. A big topic, nationally even is affordable housing. duly ask the question that's gonna help city staff, but before that, it's gonna be leveraged in the November election, I would say probably yes, even for any of this. If we see like a take up of the importance of this, maybe even like a decline in satisfaction with a few of these items, which I would expect. You know, most communities are kind of cutting into codes enforcement or development or redevelopment. We're forced with cutting our budgets. You know, you saw that trend last time in your results. If you continue to see it again, it might not be again the mayor's fault or the council's fault, but it could easily be stated that it is.
So one of the things that, I mean, you basically showed two examples, and they're actually compared to our prior form of government are actually strengths to our city. You know, one of them is how we're doing development compared to how development was done, and economic development specifically was done 4 years ago. I'm just pulling a number out of thin air. It may not be totally accurate, but you know, there's much more of an emphasis right now in economic development, and just the mechanics of how a resident goes in and files. Complaint is not the right word I'm looking for, but you want to contact City Hall. We have a Mayor's Action Center, which is responsive, much more responsive than I think that we found under the old terms of government. It just happens that, you know, those are the two real big things that show up on, you know, that were your examples, and so. You know, I would believe you're going to find those numbers if this survey was done. I think from a conventional wisdom perspective, those numbers would be lifted up.
Yeah, hopefully.
Chair Posh?
Yeah.
I hope you guys see where I'm coming from and the idea that no matter how unbiased or how slanted or unslanted the results may be or the survey questions are, bad actors can always leverage these against us or politically, for or against ourselves or them or anything like that. And I don't think without completely cutting out the usefulness of the results themselves, could we alleviate the potential of that. And in those instances I shared, it sounds like it would be beneficial, but I assume that when you all mentioned you don't want the results used politically, I would say for the mayor or the mayor's opponent, I would assume would be the case in terms of us not
Right.
be leveraged. Right?
Ryan,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, if we were to wait until after the election, what's the time frame for starting the survey and then finishing it and getting all the returns that you can possibly through your follow-up?
Yeah, I've got 3 other projects that are doing this post-election administration. We're pushing for survey approval by October 15th.
Okay.
We're going to gear up, print and mail the surveys, which will arrive the week after the election. So the election is going to be fresh in their minds, but it won't be, data can't be used, survey can't be used as a weapon. We'll administer it through the month of November and partially into December with the results first of the year, most likely, kind of mid-January is what we're kind of saying. I tend to be vague when we get so far out. I'm always worried about snowstorms in your part of the country. I'm worried about other weather that's going to impact the slower than a snail's pace USPS service for your return surveys back to me. That's what I'm always worried about that time of year. But usually I can get in and out in about 16 weeks in full. If we spent 4 weeks designing the survey, so that'd be kind of mid-September through mid-October approval, I should be able to kind of get us completely finished and through reporting in January at that point.
Thank you.
So that's about a 4-month start to finish piece. And, you know, looking at your proposal, you have, I mean, the biggest price difference is the number of responses, 300, 400, and 500.
Yep.
Basically it goes from essentially 13,000 to 20,000. It looked like we had about 400 before. And we've had some declining population.
Yeah, and so the goals are interesting, and I think we probably in 2020 set out for 400. We're able to get just over that at 452. We're not seeing above and beyond our goals as much as we used to. So I did want to mention that today. If we select 300, I would be surprised if we got to 400. And if we selected 400, I'd be probably happy with 450, but I'd also be pretty pleased with like 405 or 410. And so just kind of think about that and how the margins of errors might play in your conversations. While as the consultant professional, I can always speak pretty quickly or swiftly against some of this, but it's about a 0.5%, about half a percentage shift from 300 to 400 surveys. Margin of error drops to 5% at 400 completed surveys, basically. Again, similar to those maps and me saying, hey, the imagery can be strong. Sometimes that 5% can be really strong. If we get like 401 surveys, it goes to 4.9%. And then at 300, we're still at about 5.5. And so they kind of just think about what folks internally might say at 5.5% compared to 4.9. Usually not an issue. But something I did want to call out, I'm working with Fairfax County, Virginia. We got 1,600 completed surveys last time we did their survey. We went for 1,000, and they thought again that they were going to get 1,000. It's just not happening. So they went with 400 completed surveys. We're struggling to get to 400 in some areas in the county right now.
So how do we, is your recommendation to go with 500? Or if you get 400 and you get 450, how does that impact our pricing?
I think you can maximize your investment by purchasing the 300 sample size at that $13,250. You can promote the results and push the survey through your own communication channels. And if 450 people respond, I'm going to collect and promote or provide 450 responses. Same can be said for 400. If you all push it through your communication channels, I get 500, I'm going to provide you 500, but the price does not change.
Okay.
And so what I recommend for communities like yours, do the 300, help push the survey some generally to the general public. It'll help capture some of our randomly selected folks. We'll split the database, meaning I'm going to separate and keep separate my random sample from anybody else in the community who completes the survey. So we'll have kind of an anecdotal secondary general public database to look at as well at the end of this. And if you can push the survey responses up and above 400, you'll reduce your margin of error by maximizing your own investment. My boss would kill me if you heard me say some of this stuff, but as a city council member, I would never feel right going to my meeting in 3 hours or 2.5 hours saying, hey, I almost got City of Cleveland Heights to go 400 instead of 300. Now, if you as a city don't really want anything to do with publicizing the survey, I completely get it. Maybe 400 is the best option because it gives us that 4.9%. But I always recommend for communities about your size, go with my least big ask, 300 completed surveys, and we'll see what we can do above and beyond that.
So basically at 300, the price is between 16 and 17,000 when we look at everything, which would include like a webinar presentation, the cross tabulations, and the GIS maps, because those are the add-ons. I think in the day of Zoom, we don't necessarily need to have a face-to-face.
I think I'm just as effective online. It's a lot cheaper for everybody.
Yeah. So basically, it's a 16 to 17,000 investment. If we feel as if we don't have the administration support to push these out through channels, then we probably need to go with the 400 and work to get those a different way.
I would agree.
But I think that's a conversation we could have. Well, any other questions for Ryan before we let Ryan go?
No, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, for your time. And before we do jump off, why don't you all make a pencil note, and I'm saving this as my own file here. Why don't we include the webinar as well as the GIS maps and the cross tabulations? And I'm saving this as an updated date for my proposal. So just in case you guys don't get these notes done. And so that way you're coming in at 13,250 on 300 surveys, and you get the webinar, you get the key demographic cross tabulations, you get the GIS maps. And if you all think you don't have the ability, capacity internally, or you don't want to bother staff with this request, for 16.5 we can do the 400. Just kind of leave it as the base fees up in the top. You get everything except for the on-site visit below.
Is that one of the things that we have to make the decision before the end of the month?
Again, if you call me like in April 22nd, 2026, let's get started on the sales cookie.
I'll figure it out.
So
A little wiggle room there.
I'm sure
Okay.
it was the 23rd,
Well,
it's still on.
That's a very, very generous it's very generous, and I appreciate you working with us in that regard.
So hopefully that makes things a little bit easier in the decision department. But just let me know if you all have any other questions, if any staff want to meet, or if there's anything else I can do. Just let me know. We'll be there.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Okay.
Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Okay.
Very interesting.
I just wanted to check one message that I sent to staff regarding this issue. Yeah, I think that was very, very helpful. I wanna, if you don't mind, I wanna move to the next agenda item, come back to this particular item before we go to try to figure out what some follow-ups are. I wanna make sure, so I'm gonna move on to the deer population and public hearing and planning. Ms. Larson and myself both attended the deer, the ODNR, Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and Ohio State Deer Management Seminar in Mansfield last week. And it was a little bit of a precursor to our public hearing that we have scheduled for next week at 6 o'clock. We met with two individuals, one from the Metro Parks, John from Metro Parks and John from ODNR. I had previously coordinated with them to present for a public hearing. What I'd like to lay out real quickly is what I envision sort of a draft concept. It's on the agenda that's been published. We can change it, we can modify it, but I'd like us to discuss it to make sure that maybe we need to go in a different direction. Maybe there's some thoughts I have not considered. Maybe you guys just have a home run idea that we should do to sort of alter this. But I envision a public hearing that is focused on deer population versus deer management. Deer management is already recognizing the fact that you have a problem and you're now looking for a solution to that problem. I don't want to come into this thinking that we have a problem. I want to come into this thinking in a very open-minded way, listen to our citizens, look at the data, and then collaborate together on what we know our deer population is, possibly with some surveys, some additional information that we've collected from both Public Works and our police department to really and share that just to see really if we have a problem or not, and then organically then take a next step if we think a next step is needed. I don't want to come into this presentation with any kinds of preconceived notions that we're going to be calling deer, we're going to be sterilizing deer, or we're going to do nothing. I don't think that's a way to proceed. I'm looking at this from a legislative perspective of what we need to fund, and then give tools to our administration that they can move forward. You may recall the last conversation we had with the administration about this, and I did reach out to the mayor, and I invited the mayor to attend, not the mayor to attend, but send someone within his staff who would be involved in this project. If there was such a project, we have a public hearing, we're gonna have some speakers. I did invite them, even though nobody is here today and has shown up after I did invite them. They're welcome to join us on the 29th at 6 and be a panelist. And the mayor said that he's waiting to see the results of the sterilization programs. I think we're going to see that data presented to us next Tuesday evening. The format of the public hearing, I believe, is really a part A and a part B. It's a 2-hour public hearing. The first hour, presentations. The second hour, I devoted to a question and answers and public comment. Regarding the presentation, start with John from the Metro Parks. He has a Deer 101 presentation that Gail and I saw. It'll be a little bit more abbreviated, but it really helps articulate the fact that this is what cities today deal with deer, and this is why. So that's step one. Jeff from ODNR can talk about things like surveys. There is a need to get some kind of measurement on how big your deer population is and what your human population feels and thinks about the deer. They're pretty. We want to keep them. No, they're a safe and health risk.
We had a discussion during this workshop regarding having ODNR do an actual aerial inventory. When we first started talking about the inventory with Laura Marks in 27, whatever year that was, 2022, 2023, the acceptance of the deer inventory being accurate or necessary has changed. So the folks that we listened to on Tuesday last week were not convinced that we necessarily had to have that
Right.
inventory. But I'm leaning towards it would be a baseline. Howsoever it changes, they move. You know, how accurate is it? On Tuesday they might be here, and Thursday they might be in Shaker, whatever. But I do know that we need to present data, like the deer vehicle collision data. I think that one of the reports you sent kind of gets at that, but maybe not. That's what I was trying to see if what they sent you, because they've got these long lists of incidents, but I don't see totals. So I would really like to have a section to present our data, whether we do that before our experts or afterwards.
Well, I think the data needs to be interpreted. So
Yeah.
so what I shared with my peers is I reached out to both police and public works. This was recommended by ODNR. Find out how many deer altercations, that might not be the right word, how many dead deer are found, how many pickup of deers have happened. I got back some brief data from Public Works. I believe this year thus far there were 17 pickups, or maybe that was last year. They do capture that data. I'd have to go look again at what that my email says about that. The bigger number we received was from police, and there's been 500 such incidents over the last 2 years with descriptions. So we would have to go through that, and
What kind of incidents?
there's a deer making a lot of noise in my backyard. I can't have a child outside because of a deer. There's a dead deer found here in my yard. There's a deer that broke their leg. Some of them are pretty graphic and a little scary, and we had to euthanize a deer because of X. There's things, the whole gamut, and there's 500 such incidents over a period of 2 years. I think that the best person to answer this is going to be Jeff from ODNR, because they go through this and they would be able to help interpret that data.
Yeah, that's a lot, it sounds like, compared to some of the data we heard at the workshop.
I think the number is huge compared to what we're finding in other cities. That's what I'm concerned about. But it kind of goes, I think the whole reason we're having this is we've had, when you're a council person, you get a lot of feedback from residents. I'd say the number 2 item. Number 1 issue is roads. The number 2 item is altercations regarding deer. I see my peers nod their heads. It's an issue. We got to find a solution for it, or help our administration come up with a solution for it.
As long as we can tackle skunks next.
I don't get any complaints from skunks.
Oh my God.
Sorry, no skunks. No skunks.
Doesn't live in your neighborhood.
So bad. Well, I have a deer highway running through my backyard too, so. A multiple issue.
There was one other thing that they suggested as an option besides sterilization and harvesting. and that was, we could do a PSA, public service announcement, to ask people to stop feeding the deer.
My neighbors, they do it.
Really?
And do they complain about the deer, or do they love?
No, they like them, and they,
Well, I've spoken to one person who you know, I won't name, who complained about the deer, and then we went back and they were feeding him apples. You know, so so
Well, it was pretty clear in our presentation, it's a no-no to feed deer.
yeah.
And cities passed legislation to forbid it. You know, that is something that certainly could be on this council's radar. And I think after the public forum next week, you know, I think we could discuss this and come up with something. So mechanically, you know, having the presentations as kind of laid out, any other thoughts about that?
How are you looking at time for the presentations for our presenters? 15 minutes each, 20 minutes each?
Well, that deer presentation was an hour and a half. That's not
No, it's
gonna fly. I was actually kind of hoping 45 minutes for the Metro Parks presentation and 15 minutes for ODNR,
So the first hour.
the first hour. So half presentation and the second half discussion and public comment. I was, the city has put this out in their newsletter.
This is
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna reach out to council members to see if they could use their individual communication channels,
I sure will.
if you can publicize it,
Just give me a
I can do
little
that.
blurb.
I guess I did too.
But I mean, I think we wanna make sure that we're really talking about, I mean, we're gonna hear passion, I think we're gonna hear passionate pleas that love the deer, we don't wanna do anything with the deer are okay, they're our friends, they belong here. And I think we're gonna see the other side of that as well. You know, they're a pest, I'm just putting words in people's mouths, they're a pest and we need to control. We need some management of that. I mean, I think we're gonna have to, listen, learn, and then find ways of sharing this information with our peers.
There's a third group of people who, when you look at these police reports, they are so concerned about these injured deer they're calling. You know, they're reporting incidents where these animals are suffering. And that was the other component of that we talked about at that workshop, is that this is not normal for them to be in amongst vehicles and in these habitats where there are so many things that they can get injured on. There's crazy stuff they've gotten injured on when you read that report that you sent out. So I hope we can make that third point about there's another group of people, and that they may be people who love the deer and they may be people who hate the deer, but ultimately you don't want to see a living being suffering because of something that we've created for them.
So I don't think about this, but I was talking to a reporter this afternoon, and not even thinking about putting this public forum together with you guys, and two daughters had significant issues with so Mary, you wanna join us?
No, thank you.
We were discussing the deer population public hearing. Are you just sitting in? Do you have anything to thoughts or say or anything?
Just popping in for a little bit.
Great, sounds good. Well, welcome. Thanks for being here. Well, we have, is it okay to proceed with the public hearing the way that I've sort of planned it thus far?
And 3 minutes for each person that speaks.
Well, we said, I think 3 is gonna be enough, possibly adjusted to 2, depending on how many people. We probably need a sign-up sheet. You're not gonna be there?
Yeah, so logistics wise, I will not be there. I will have the sign up sheets as we have them normally.
Okay.
So they will be collected, and I've started using that tray so they can be in order of who
So we'll
arrives
need
first, so.
timer.
Yes, and I was gonna say, I already talked to Steve, cause you said you wanted to do the tables instead of being necessarily on the dais, so he can run an extension so one of you guys will have to run the timer.
I can handle that.
Okay.
Thanks.
I can do the sheets and the timer.
Oh, I'll do the
Okay.
sheets.
That'd be great.
I got the sheets. We'll split it.
Okay.
I don't like the Dias. I just think it sets a bad tone for this kind of thing. I'd much rather we're on the same ground, everybody. Any other thoughts regarding the deer population?
You
Not
need
here.
it, yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't.
Moving on to parking bans.
Do you need me doing anything with that data, or you got the data covered in terms of what? Do we have a sheet we could hand out that could give the people the information, or how would you present that?
I don't feel qualified to interpret the data. I thought we would discuss the data in the meeting
Okay,
with Jeff Westerfield from
Sounds good.
ODNR.
Yeah.
I think if anybody's gonna interpret that data, he would be the right one.
all right. So you're gonna send those 2 reports to him?
I was gonna wait until the meeting, but I'll send it to him in advance. I think that's a good idea. I think that's a great idea. I didn't think about that. Thank you.
Good.
So there's I believe, Mr. Cobb, you sent me the parking ban information,
I sent you the email that had come from
Mark Hoffman.
Mark Hoffman, who had sent it earlier to Councilwoman Boyd. And I may have gone to other council members, and frankly, until I ran into him, I had forgot that I had received it. And I just happened to pull it up, and he's interested in having us eliminating the parking bans on Overlook Road in the area where the apartments are. That's Overlook, and is that Kenilworth over in that area? According to his email, they had been eliminated during COVID, but are now being enforced. He thinks that it is hampered efforts to get residents in the apartments.
Well, that certainly seems, that's gotta be forwarded to the administration. I'm not sure that's something, I mean, does council legislate parking bans?
Yes. We do, we determine, the streets that have overnight parking.
Well,
the hours of that.
we should do it with the staff recommendation.
And we get a recommendation, I think it may be from the police department.
Well, if the mayor's in the room, we will ship it off to the mayor for the mayor to determine how you'd wanna deal with it.
I'm gonna forward that right now.
Do we wanna have any more conversation regarding the survey? Or do we wanna chew on this a little bit? We're getting close to our 6 o'clock timeframe.
I don't know that we need to reach any decision tonight. I would, maybe if we can have this as an agenda item for all of council.
I'd like to adjust the meeting for next month to be within one of the first 2 weeks of May. I'll be out of town the last 2 weeks. And I'd kind of like to have a follow-up conversation after the deer
It's not letting me send this.
public hearing.
No, it looks like the 13th is available, which is a Tuesday. I'm okay with that.
What day is that?
13th is a Tuesday.
I think that'll be all right.
There's a housing and building committee standing meeting at 5.
Well, there's 5:30 on the 12th, which is a Monday, for housing and building.
Do we wanna do a 5 o'clock meeting on Tuesday?
I just do like a quick 30-minute.
I can give it an hour.
Well, then you'd be 4:30,
Oh,
because he's at 5:30 on Monday.
pardon me?
Housing and building is 5:30 on Monday.
Oh, I'm thinking of the 13th on Tuesday.
Oh, on 13th. Okay, gotcha. 5 o'clock, you said?
Yes,
I can do that.
that's great. Okay, any old business? New business? I'd like to thank everybody and let's adjourn the meeting.